What's the most legendary thing that happened in your school? Jeff jumped off the roof of the chapel into a dumpster filled with empty cardboard boxes. 50-foot drop. 8x8 dumpster. Edit. We are gathered here today to mourn the inbox of a Kraloped. Edit 2. Some background. Twice a week at our school, the junior and senior guys were on garbage/recycling duty after lunch. We'd gather all the garbage bags and recycling from the classrooms and offices. The building was a school attached to a church with offices and a sort of community center. It wasn't a huge building, but it was pretty big. We'd take all the garbage and trash out to the dumpster, which was set next to some sheds behind the building. That's how it all started. Jeff jumping off a 10 to 12 foot shed into a dumpster full of cardboard boxes. We'd laugh, roll the dumpster out to where the garbage guy could get to it. Someone else rolled it back when garbage was collected. One day Jeff climbed the backstop of the baseball field right near the dumpsters. That was a 25 to 30 foot drop, I think. He made that one look easy. Then he dropped in from out of a tree that was probably about 40 feet. Finally, about a month from our graduation, he told us his plan. He had to break into the crawl space above the chapel, accessible by a padlock trapdoor on the 3rd floor of classrooms, then climb up through the attic space of the chapel and onto the roof. The chapel parking lot sloped sharply by about 7 to 8 feet, which is where the 50-foot drop comes in. We saved boxes for weeks, set them up in the dumpster, put it in the parking lot about 15 feet from the chapel wall, and watched him jump. When I was in grade 9, I was sitting in the computer lab working, and during the communications class, all of a sudden, we hear this loud revving getting louder and louder, something passing by very quickly then fading away. Our teacher ran out of the room after it, and crike, I had no idea the man could move that quickly. I was in crutches due to a sports injury, so I had to hobble out behind the rest of the class as we tried to find out what was going on. Apparently, one of seniors brought an ATV to school and drove through the halls. What was legendary was that he somehow was never caught. Edit. I love the internet. Half the replies are about my 6 AM sleepy mistype. All of a sudden. I mean, it's technically not wrong. Edit. More detail. This was in Canada, in the early 2000s. There was a video floating somewhere on FB, which means it's probably lost forever. Pretty crappy, since it was literally one of the early digital cameras taped onto the guy's helmet. If I remember correctly, they let him in through an unused auto classroom side door, and he rode out the back. The area was very rural, so he probably drove it in instead of in the back of a pickup. Most likely rode it straight home too, so yeah, no proof at the end of it. I took an A+ course in high school. We had an alright sized lab room for stripping computers and another room full of computers for other work or lessons. There were a few stuffed animals in the lesson room as a half-assed attempt by my teacher to decorate. Those come into play later. My teacher kept finding born history on one of the computers. It was always horribly spelled or incoherent searches, and she assumed it was a freshman being as smart as to impress his friends during a different class. One day she gets fed up with it and makes a special project for us nerds in her A+ course. She gave us one of the lab computers and the smallest cam she could find and asked us to make a hidden camera. We complied and made a decent one and brought it into the other room, set it to record with more than enough hard drive space, and aimed it at the perp's putter. The next day we fire up the vid and see one of the seniors coming in before school starts, googling some porn and giving himself the old wax job. He cleaned up with one of the stuffed animals and went about his business. She threw out the stuffed animals and the cops got involved. Kid got into trouble, but went into the army after high school, so maybe it all worked out in the end. My high school was a bit on the sketchy side. During my sophomore year there was a fire, and despite all the fire drills we'd been doing since kindergarten, no one really knew what to do. Some students made their way 10 blocks away to a Wendy's and a Waldbaum's, where they proceeded to rob both. At the end of my junior year, this sophomore threw his freshman girlfriend through a display case. She ended up with 13 stitches, and he got a lovely pair of handcuffs in my senior year. We got a new principal, because the old one quit at the end of the year prior. Anyway, this was the year the 5th Harry Potter book came out, and even before the school year started people were calling her Umbridge because of her reputation at her last school. Most of us thought she couldn't be that bad. Then we met her. She really was awful. To make matters worse, she was racist to boot. One of the black teachers didn't agree with her teaching style, so she fired his lazy ninja, as in her words. Within a week, the narc was at the school. Before she finally resigned, there was a student walkout and people started throwing cafeteria fruit at her whenever they saw her. We were all glad to be rid of her. I'm from a small town in Indiana. That means two things. Nobody really knows what you're talking about when you say where you're from. Here in Indiana, you're either from around Fort Wayne or around Indianapolis. You never see fights break out. Maybe a little slap fest, but that's it. The worst I'd witnessed before this was this one girl dumping Gatorade on another girl. Nothing exciting point, but this day. This day broke both stereotypes. We were put on a hard lockdown that day, meaning we had to sit in class until the teacher released us. We missed the entirety of third period, sitting there in second period, while our teachers got bored and started watching cat videos with us on YouTube. Typically, a hard lockdown means a shooter got in the school or something, but nope. That apparently wasn't what was going on. A senior, who was over 18, got in a fight with a freshman over a sophomore girl, and then they pushed each other out a faking window. We were on the news. You don't say you're from around Fort Wayne anymore. Nowadays in Indiana you can get away with saying we're from that town where the kids went out a window. Edit. I just need to clarify some misinformation on this. Sorry about everything. Yes. Some people also say I'm from around Chicago or I'm from direction, Indiana. My point was, you'll never hear a guy tell you they're from Wabash, Indiana. Second, I seem to have miscalculated the impact of the window shatter. It was on the Fort Wayne news station, so only people in Northeast Indiana know about it. I'm not going to confirm the location, so please don't try to send me your guesses. Finally, we don't really say we are from the place where the kid went out the window. Usually, if you do happen to say the name of your town/high school, people will respond with, isn't that where those kids went through a window? 2 years ago, the app Yik Yak was growing in popularity at my school. Maybe about 25% of the student population had it, but since it is anonymous, people started roasting other people through it. Just as people were no longer using Yik Yak, our sheethead principal heard about people roasting other people. He made an announcement talking about Yik Yak and digital citizenship. Naturally, everyone re-downloaded the app, and anybody who didn't previously have it downloaded it as well. Word quickly got out that some teachers got Yik Yak as well and were monitoring it. People started to post stuff like fight in the art hallway and laugh as a group of 3 teachers would speed walk by then towards the art hallway, on to find out there was no fight and see the next post, fight in the cafeteria. This went on for 45 minutes until people moved on to better pranks. I'm pulling the fire alarm next period. Our sheethead principal misread this as firearm and called a lockdown on the school, which lasted for 80 minutes, and there were cop case all around the school. Later that night, my school was on the news, and Yik Yak is now blocked within 100 meters, I think, of any school in my school board. TLDR, my school got Yik Yak banned in my entire school board. Edit. Maybe it wasn't just my school board. Maybe it's all of Canada or something. I'm really not too sure. In my school, I get off the bus, get in a long line to get through doors, which go to metal detectors, then it goes into the lunchroom. All rooms branch off there. Well, one day they shut the doors. No one knew why, but many people trampled over each other to look through the windows, which were large. I didn't feel like dying ATM, so I stayed in the back, on my computer, playing Smash Brothers. We go to a tech school. Everyone has comps. People up at the windows were screaming at the top of their lungs, cheering something on. They reopened the doors and let us in 30 minutes later, finished the metal detector scan, and told us we were in lockdown. Lockdown lasted 3 hours. Fine. No class. Played comp games. We then went to our classes. What happened was the day before a gang shooting occurred outside of school, but that was somehow the cause of the fight at our school. A large fight, 10 people per group. 5 ice groups, knives, 1 gun somewhere. The legendary part was many principals and cops were involved in breaking it up. Many people got body slammed to the ground, but Dr. Black, one of the principals, randomly got hit with a muffin out of nowhere. This was the butt of jokes at the school for a long while. Point to wrap this up. Our school has a dank memes subreddit over at r/memes. In case you think I'm lying, point edit. My most upvoted comment is about muffins. Late to the party, but worth a shot. Point at our school, UK. On the year 11's final day of the year they would do egg and flour day. Essentially, pelting the lower years with eggs and flour. This was a long-standing tradition at my school, and went back decades, as you can imagine, with parents understandably annoyed at the sight of the kids coming home covered in mess. The school received a lot of complaints. Because of this, the school clamped down on it in the past 2 to 3 years with huge punishments for those caught taking part. To get around this, the year 11s typically moved the location to somewhere off grounds, where students could be ambushed on the way home. Typically the local shops anyway. It was our turn. We were the year 11s now. We wanted to make our mark. A group of around 10 or so of us got together towards the end of the year and started brainstorming. It took us about a week to come up with it, and it was perfect. Or so we thought. Point here was the plan. The school was recently going through some renovations, so a few things were moved around, and a few areas were off limits, including one of the fields. Now this field was where we would go in the event of a fire drill. Because of this, the fire drill point was moved to the tennis courts. Great. Why was this great? Because the tennis courts bordered on the local woods. The very edge of these woods were bordered by incredibly dense growth that was very difficult to see anything through. Between the growth and the tennis courts was a 10-foot fence, and just behind the growth was a pathway. Perfect point. So the plan was set. We will send a guy inside, get him to pull the fire alarm, then send a barrage of eggy flour death to the unsuspecting lower year peasants beyond the fence. Point skip forward to the day of the event. We sent him in to be the man on the inside. We were ready and waiting in the woods, armed to the teeth with pancake ingredients. We waited a long time. It must have been an hour and a half at that point. We'll come back to this later. This was before mobile phones, so we had no contact with the man on the inside. An oversight. We sent in Christian to find out what was going on, and we waited. Not long this time. 20 minutes later the bell went off. It was happening. Point first we would only hear the piercing ring if the bell. A minute later, the loud chatter of many prepubescent voices. It got louder and louder. The tennis court was filling up. Students were getting into their lines. We waited for the perfect moment to strike. A few more minutes later, things quietened down. We started to hear the teachers shooting out names, going through their registers. This was it. Time to strike. Point with the students now silent. It was time to unsilent them. Without saying a word, we unleashed. Cartons of eggs were emptied into the air, over the fence, and down onto the underlings to the most satisfying crack splits. Flour baggies were spilt and tossed over, leaving trails of white smoke, before landing with a puff, and filling up the area with clouds of potential biscuit. Point the screams. Oh, were they glorious. The complete sound of chaos. It started with silence, shock as to what was going on. Then the fear set in. Nobody wanted to be egged. The tennis courts exploded into a mass of running kids, dodging yoke, trying to get out of the way. Teachers trying to find out what was going on, barking orders and trying to calm everyone down, to little success, and that was it. Within 60 seconds we had exhausted our ammo and it was time to retreat. Laughing hysterically and celebrating our accomplishment, we melted back into the woods and fell back to our meeting point. It was done. We were legends. Now let's fast forward a week. Remember Tim? The guy in the inside who took too long pulling the alarm. Turns out he didn't pull alarm because we noticed they were all covered by CCTV. Another oversight. When Christian went in, he didn't bother looking and pulled the first alarm he came across. He was called into the school a few days later and ordered to give a list of names. It was either he did or prom would be cancelled that year. Can't blame him really. I probably would have done the same thing. Those who were on the list, the choice was either 8 hours community service in the school or be barred from prom. We all took the service and spent the day with the school caretaker doing absolutely fuck all. Point it was great. 10/10ths would egg again. Oh fuck. Here we go. We had a bomb shelter at my high school. I don't know why, probably because of when it was constructed. In a hoe. One particular asshole weed dealer kid, he was the kind of douche who would actually threaten people if they didn't buy his weed. Brought a 2-pound sack of that chronic to school and hid it in the hole underneath the tiles by the garbage can. Aka the bomb shelter access. A teacher saw what happened during his free period, went down and proceeded to fuck this kid's finances up something awful. As it turned out, the teacher toked up to his heart's desire. Then when he had enough, he lit the rest of it on fire. Then went back up into the main hall and to the bathroom just before the bell to switch classes. Bell rings. Teacher comes running out of the bathroom, cries out that there's a fire, grabs the fire extinguisher and hops down into the shelter. By the time the fire dept and police showed up, he was covered in white powder, stoned out of his mind, and had a perfectly valid alibi to be ripped out of his mind, since everybody saw his quick thinking and jump to action. The principal furnished this dude with a can of Pringles and thanked him for saving the school. I was in an all-boys high school, and this is just one of the many pranks and stuff we did. This happened a few years before I was in the school, but one guy decided to get back at one of the old beachy teachers we had whose class was on the second floor. He decided to purposely not do his homework to get in trouble as to set the plan in motion. She was also constantly picking on him, and that day he started crying, fake obviously, and saying he can't take it anymore, etc. He then proceeded to jump out of the window onto a high jump mattress that was placed underneath the window by his friends. Before the teacher could look out of the window, they removed it, and he went to lie down on the ground in a manner which resembled a mangled body. The teacher freaked out, went to fetch the principal and nurse etc. And before they got there, he got up and went back to class and sat down at his seat as if nothing happened. Teacher was speechless. Edit. Like I said, this happened a few years before I was in the school, so I didn't really hear about the aftermath of their shenanigans. It's also possible that it never happened and that it's an urban legend going around. I have more stories about stuff we did, if anyone is interested. I went to a professional training high school. We had to choose a major for our senior year, and on Tuesday and Thursdays, we would spend the entire day in classes involving our chosen major. Strange, yay. Only lasted for a few years. Now it's just a regular magnet school. Whatever. Here's my story. My tech teacher was cool as fuck. He'd give us a project on Tuesday morning, and we'd have until Thursday afternoon to turn it in. If we were done early, have fun on the internet. If late, well, that's a strike on your grade. Most of the students busted us on projects on Tuesdays, so we could watch Jerry Springer on the TV cart in the back of the room on Thursdays. Me and 2 other kids would play Warcraft 2nd on the network computers we set up. Seriously, this teacher didn't give a fuck as long as our work was done. One Thursday, one of the students in my class was flipping around the in-service channels the school had. Sometimes they would play a movie on it for some class. Guess what? Hard faking core black on black. Student quickly turned it down and turned the TV from the line of view of the teacher. Teacher still heard it. He came over, coffee cup in hand, looked at the class, looked at the TV that wasn't turned off in time, looked back at the class, took a sip. First off, anyone offended? Class, no, keep it low. If someone comes in, turn it off. Background. 4 years ago, went to a small Christian high school. Open campus accessed from the outside, not one big building entered through inside. This school was hell. To attend we had to sign a document that let them breach our rights to privacy, and they could go through our phones, texts, backpacks without any probably cause. Drug testing students randomly, paid by our tuition. Drug dogs on campus that never caught anything in my 4 years, and paid by tuition. Every class loved to hate the school. It was like the establishment. Anyhow, had these group of 4 kids in my high school, couple years older than me, come to school one night and wipe sheet everywhere on the windows of our classrooms and inside of the door handles. Teachers got real pissed at that clever move. One teacher was so infuriated he says to our class, fact the senior class absolutely enraged. Anyhow, they cancelled prom and our student pride week unless one of them came forward. For at least 2 weeks no one came forward and no one knew if it was even a senior prank or just kids from elsewhere. Every day at the end of school our principal would come on and reiterate his blank threats and we all just laughed. I was a sophomore, so I didn't care about prom. After a couple weeks the principal cancelled graduation. Parents were outraged and school quickly stood firm that there'd be no graduation and everyone would just be mailed diplomas. Eventually one of the group came forward and snitched. One kid lost a scholarship for D1 sports, another was the class president, and the other two were expelled. Best part about it is we deemed them the perpetrators, which remains the most infamous nickname of our school's history. This story is real, 100% true. Shout out to the perpetrators that were as fed up as all of us. Elementary school, candy got banned because some kids brought in these chocolate bottles full of booze and our principal didn't like the idea of hammered second graders. Also, someone flushed my brother's entire lunchbox down the toilet. Kind of an accomplishment, now that I think about it. Middle school was lame, so I'm skipping that part. High school, band teacher got caught schmanging a student. Her diary, which detailed how good it felt to have a real man touch her, ended up on all the online news articles about the story for like 2 days, until it got taken down. I, female, was alone in rooms with that teacher a bunch of times during piano class, so that's cool. We weren't allowed to wear it due to large numbers of gang members in my school. Problem: red is also our school color. Solution: we could wear red on Fridays, because it's okay to be in a gang on Fridays. Senior prank: my year ended up being a bunch of kids spray painting the school and smearing peanut butter everywhere. Kids with peanut allergies either got sent home or had an allergic person open all the peanut buttery door handles for them and tried not to touch anything else. No one really liked that prank. Kids got caught having sex on the floor of a hallway by security cameras, which, considering all the nasty shit that ends up on the floor of high school hallways, is pretty unsanitary to say the least. Edit: cause I forgot this one. For chemical we were supposed to do some kind of end of the year group presentation on a chemistry related topic of our choice. Our teacher didn't feel it was necessary to approve topics, since we were the smart honors kids who would never do anything bad. One group chose how to make crack cocaine, which, as it is indeed chemistry, totally counted and is also why I get to say I learned how to make crack in high school honors chemistry. Now topics have to be approved. TLDR, public school is great. We used to think our old principal was kind of lame until he was replaced my senior year. The new principal had an overly strict way of running things and everyone realized pretty quickly that our old principal was actually pretty rad and a really nice guy. New principal comes in during lunch one day and picks up a microphone, starts lecturing everyone there that, because of how messy the lunchroom has been lately, that we are in for some changes. One guy starts clapping. From now on the outdoor eating area will be off limits. A whole table starts clapping. Furthermore, no one will be allowed to leave until a teacher checks your table for cleanliness. Half the lunchroom starts cheering. I'm glad you're all thrilled about this, because these changes will be effective for the rest of the month. The entire lunchroom erupts in applause. At that exact moment, the old principal wanders into the lunchroom, and I swear it's like someone had just hit a home run. Everyone jumped to their feet cheering and screaming, the most enthusiastic applause I have ever heard. The old principal is just waving, bowing his head as he strolls into the room. Meanwhile the current principal is lost in all of this and leaves. It was one of the most terrific things I ever witnessed. When I was in middle school we planned an all-out food fight. We had a date planned, and a secret code word for everyone to know it was on. And lastly, the day of the food fight was chili day, because we didn't plan on just raising a little hell. It all started out with a kid throwing an orange peel at the lunch monitor toward the very end of the lunch hour. Even this act alone was unheard of, as this was a school in white middle-class suburbia. Everyone was shocked at the sign of aggression, but things escalated when the kid then proceeded to argue with the monitor. This caused everyone to stand up and look to see what was going on. Even those furthest from the incident wanted to know why everyone was standing. Little did we know that this was just the beginning. At the moment everyone stood, that a girl proceeded to flip over the salad cart and scream the infamous code word, "Chunky monkey." All hell broke loose. It looked like a war zone. Food was everywhere, in all directions. Chili was dripping from the walls, lettuce was sticking to windows, the floor was covered in milks and other unknown juices. People were covered in an unholy combination of sauces, gelatins, greases, and unknown substances of which man was never supposed to discover. Most people ran, some people cried, a few simply basked in the insanity point. Then, as quickly as it started, everything stopped and became quiet. I don't quite remember what I did after that, but I do remember going to class regularly, as if nothing had even occurred. It wasn't until the next day that we learned of the fallout. The teacher started the day by trying to shame us by telling us how our food fight made it in the city paper. Of course, instead of shame we felt an immense pride and camaraderie. We felt a great respect for our 15 fallen food warriors who were fined and rumored to be arrested from the events. Unfortunately, the legend never carried on. The school made a great effort to never mention it to following school years, and my fellow students had awful storytelling skills. It was not 6 years later that my youngest brother had never even heard of the story while he attended the same middle school. But it didn't matter to me, for the memory will never fade from my mind. That day, we were the stuff of legends, and that's all that matters to me. TLDR, in middle school we staged a luncheon coup of all things orderly in the cafeteria. We attacked on chilly day. Our plan was intricate and swiftly executed. War broke loose. Food bombarded the once clean lunchroom. Brothers in arms were punished severely. We made the paper. We became legends for a few years, then faded out into a fond memory, never to be forgotten by all who witnessed our victory. I'm a little late to the party, so this might get buried. This was at a school for the Navy, when I was in, basically college for the military where they teach you your jobs. We all stayed in barracks on a open to public base. The base really wasn't a base, it was just where everyone went to school. In the military point at the front door of each barracks, there was a watch guard established by residents in the barracks. You got assigned watch every 4 days and someone had to stand door watch and check IDs to allow people in. If no ID, they were not allowed to let anyone in. Well, one day someone had snuck in a pellet gun in their room and someone mistook it as a handgun, called the police, and SWAT showed up. When SWAT barged right through the front door full of riot gear ready to kick us, the guy on watch stood in their way and demanded he see ID before he let any of them in, and would not budge. Well, SWAT didn't have the proper identification, but one of them had a 12 gauge shotgun they had no problem shoving in his face. That's when the guard stood there, saluted and said, "Welcome aboard. I have never met someone so dedicated to standing watch." Guy got like a day off or something. Not sure if this is legendary, but one day we got to school and the power was out. Our school was kind of crappy, so we didn't think too much of it until about 30 minutes into our first class, and the power still wasn't on. The principal came on and told the teachers to hold us until later. They had just got rid of whiteboards and got these smart boards that you couldn't draw on. The teachers are all just letting us do whatever we wanted since they couldn't do any of their lessons. We could tell the power wasn't going to come on anytime soon, so we were trying to just leave. Some kids just bolted, but most people were just waiting for the okay to leave. Finally, the principal comes on and tells us we can leave if our parents came and checked us out. Most parents, work, so very few kids could actually leave. We were calling our parents. More kids started just walking out, and everyone, including teachers, was pissed. Basically, this one teacher would not let anyone leave, even for the bathroom, until the office called them down. This girl snuck into the closet and climbed out the damn window. People from other classes could see her on the damn roof, and that, of course, led the principal to have to get a ladder and get her down off the roof. Not sure if it was legendary, but it was pretty funny. In 10th grade, I broke a kid's arm in self-defense. In truth, he tried to kick me after a mutually mean-spirited conversation went on too long, which I do regret. I grabbed his leg, threw him to the ground, and gravity plus concrete broke his arm. But as far as the school was concerned, I broke a kid's arm. Now that by itself wasn't that remarkable. I went to a Quaker school. Violence was strictly forbidden. Add to that the kid's father was a rich lawyer. I was looking at no less than a week's suspension. All I cared about was my transcript. I wasn't Mr. Popular by any means, but I was well liked and respected throughout school, teachers, and students. Knowing this, I went around, being a present mind, and asked if anyone had witnessed the confrontation immediately after it occurred. I then asked these people if they would testify as to what they witnessed and nothing else. Unfortunately, but not really, my suspension started before I could plead my case. The first time I met with the principal, he basically lectured me and told me the other kid said I beat him up. This made me smile. I went home, and the next day the principal met with the witnesses I had talked to. They all independently said the same thing and totally contradicted the other kid's BS. My suspension continued for another day, but there would be no record of it on my transcript point, so in the end, I broke a kid's arm and got a 3-day vacation. 2 days later I aced my test and scored the winning point in Varsity Ultimate. Outside of getting laid, that was pretty much a perfect week. In middle school, our class was known as the loudest and least well-behaved class of all time. It didn't help that our math teacher was extremely laid back and was usually, especially in the beginning, part of our not so ideal behavior. We never did anything awful, but I know, had the principal ever seen what actually went down in class, he probably would have gotten fired. My best example of legendary was probably during a math mock exam, which at our school works exactly like an exam. Don't know how this goes down in other countries. Making any noise whatsoever is forbidden and would get you thrown out. But our teacher allowed us to blast music from our computers, use Skype with the teacher's Wi-Fi, and order McDonald's. You see, one of the girls called their grandma and asked if us could bring Mickey D's, so she brought for the whole class. Keep in mind we were 15 at this point. Other notable stuff with that teacher was during one class we convinced him to come with us to some fast food store nearby and pick up some burgers. He got on his motorcycle and went with us. Another time he interrupted class to tell stories about him driving from the police etc. After a while things cooled down and word got around, so he had to stop doing what he did. I don't think he was popular among other teachers. I still have no clue how no one heard all of the crazy from our classroom. It's 3 years since I graduated, and he gets mentioned every time I meet any former classmates. I can't wait for the class reunion in 10+ years. Legend has it that a year before I started school, the senior prank was switching the daily news tape that plays on all of the TVs in the school with a born tape. There was a riot at the end of my freshman year where fights broke out all over campus. I was in geometry class when suddenly the door slams open and 2 students tumble in the room beating the shit out of each other. There was a roar coming from outside, so we all left the room to see a riot of students. The amphitheater was filled, and the principals were driving around in their go-kart trying to break up the fights. They got surrounded, and the students started to pick up the go-kart. I think their plan was to toss them down the amphitheater steps. Cops were called, and we were forced out of the campus. The rest of the school year, 2 days left, was cancelled. There was the legendary week of bomb threats. Some kid was prank calling the school saying there was a bomb on campus. So we had to evacuate the school every time this kid called and wait for the bomb squad to tell us the campus is clear. It was fun because we all got to play around on the field. There was a student going around to all the classrooms that had their doors open and spraying a fire extinguisher inside. It freaked everyone out because the room would get foggy and there was white powder everywhere. It was unclear at the time what it was, and people thought they were just poisoned or something. Had to evacuate the rooms and wait for the fire department to tell us it was safe. Oh yeah, almost forgot. Some kid brought a gun to school, but it was stolen. So they set up a fight after school was out. The time comes for them to fight. The kid that stole the gun goes to take it out of his pocket and accidentally shoots himself in the leg. Had a moron. I managed to get the caretaker, the head of science, my science professor, myself, and 4 paramedics quarantined at the local hospital for about 4 hours, as well as getting pretty much every emergency service in the state on premise, complete with guys in white suits. I'd found a small sample of cesium-137 on the side of the road out the front of the local technical college, TAFE. In Australia, on the way to school. We'd recently used this material in our senior physics classes, along with our unreliable Geiger counters, and some cloud chambers, and it was encased in about an inch of lead, so I was fairly happy that it was relatively safe, and knew that my school should know how to dispose of it properly. As such, I took it to my science teacher, and handed it over, before heading back to classes. Halfway through class, I get pulled out by guys in white suits, who proceed to scan my bag for radiation. I had to ditch all the good born behind the chemistry labs, and then take me to the lab where a bunch of other people were congregating. Now, remember when I said we had unreliable Geiger counters? Well, it turns out, they would work correctly 50% of the time. The other 50%, it would tell you that you'd just been nuked. Guess which one it was when they decided to test the sample point as such, just to be safe. 000 was called 911/112 for all the non-Australians, and the sheetstorm commenced. No one knew what to do, so everyone arrived. EPA, hazmat, fire, ambulance, police, SEs, pretty much every emergency response unit in the state, including some over 300 kilometers away, made their way to the school. As mentioned, I was carted off in the back of an ambulance with my physics teacher, and the head of science was carted off with the caretaker. When we got to the hospital, no one knew if we were radioactive or what to do with us, so we were quarantined in the ambulances for a few hours until they determined what was going on and sent us all home without any further tests. Turns out, we were exposed to more radiation from the basalt in the mountains during our year 11th ski trip, where one kid broke his back right as we were getting ready to leave, but it certainly makes for a killer story. Of course, the news wasn't allowed to interview students, so they made up whatever the hell they wanted, but here are some articles about the incident from the completely inaccurate. We were taken to the John Hunter, not the Mater,